The restaurant was packed, the clatter of dishes mixing with bursts of laughter and low chatter. But for Emily, the night was dragging on like a slow-burning nightmare. She had been on her feet for 9 hours straight, her apron stained with coffee spills, her ponytail frizzy with exhaustion, but she still forced a smile for every customer she served. Tips had been meager, complaints plenty, and the manager had already scolded her twice for reasons beyond her control. Just one more hour, she told herself. Just one more, and I can go home. But then, he walked in, dressed in a custom-tailored suit, a Rolex peeking from his wrist, and a presence that demanded attention. The man exuded wealth and arrogance in equal measure. He didn't wait to be seated or acknowledge the host. He simply picked the best table by the window and sat down as if he owned the place. Emily noticed the way other customers stole glances at him, some whispering in recognition. He was someone important, but to her, he was just another customer. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her notepad and approached. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Maison d'Or. Can I get you something to drink while you decide on your meal?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. The man didn't even look up from his phone. He lazily flipped through his screen. Then finally, without lifting his gaze, he muttered, "Sparkling water. With a twist of lemon. Not too much lemon. And make sure it's chilled, not room temperature. I don't want it if it's wrong." "Got it?" Emily bit the inside of her cheek. Customers like this weren't uncommon, but something about his tone, his complete disregard for her presence, irritated her. Still, she nodded. "Of course, sir. Anything else?" This time, he did look up. His piercing blue eyes scanned her face, and there was a flicker of something. Amusement? Superiority? "Yes. Competent service. Do you think you can manage that, sweetheart?" Her stomach twisted, but she forced herself to remain professional. "Absolutely. I'll be right back with your water." She turned sharply on her heel and headed for the kitchen, inhaling deeply to shake off the irritation. Just another entitled rich guy, she told herself. But something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her like she was beneath him, set her on edge. A few minutes later she returned, placing the glass of sparkling water in front of him with a polite, practiced smile. He lifted it to his lips, took a sip, and immediately grimaced. "This isn't chilled enough," he said, shaking his head. "I specifically said chilled, not whatever this is. Try again." Emily gritted her teeth, took the glass back and went to get another one, this time adding extra ice. When she returned, he took another sip. "Now it's too cold." He sighed dramatically, as if this was the greatest inconvenience of his life. "Are you even listening when I speak?" A few customers turned to glance their way, sensing the tension. Emily exhaled slowly, her patience thinning. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll fix it right away." But the man simply smirked and leaned back. No, forget it. I'll just order. Hopefully you can manage that without messing it up." Her hands curled into fists, hidden behind her notepad. "Of course, sir. What would you like?" He snapped the menu shut and tossed it onto the table. "Filet mignon, medium rare. And make sure it's actually medium rare. If I see it overcooked, I'll send it back." She jotted it down, but before she could leave, he spoke again. "Actually, forget that. I'll have the salmon instead, and make sure there are no bones. You understand? Number bones." "Got it," Emily said, holding back the urge to roll her eyes. "Wait. No, I don't want salmon anymore. I'll have the filet mignon after all. Or is that too complicated for you?" A few soft gasps came from nearby tables. The restaurant had gone quieter, the staff exchanging uneasy glances. He was doing this on purpose. Emily's jaw tightened. She felt her pulse spike, her skin growing hot, but she forced a calm nod. "Filet mignon, medium rare. Anything else?" He tilted his head, a mocking smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah. How about a smile? You look miserable, sweetheart. Maybe if you tried harder, you wouldn't be stuck waiting tables. The last straw snapped. Before she even realized what she was doing, her hand moved on its own. A sharp smack echoed across the restaurant as her palm collided with his face. Silence. Pure, deafening silence. The man froze. His head turned slightly from the impact, the red imprint of her hand visible against his sharp jawline. All eyes were on them. Emily's chest heaved, her fingers tingling from the contact, her brain catching up with what she'd just done. Oh God. A moment passed, then another, before the man slowly turned back to face her. But he didn't yell. He didn't threaten. Instead, he grinned. A slow, dangerous grin, like he had just won something. Her stomach dropped. The manager came rushing out from the back. "Emily!" he hissed, his face a mix of shock and rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She opened her mouth, but the man held up a hand, stopping her. No, he said smoothly, touching his stinging cheek. "Let her speak. I'd love to hear what excuse she has for assaulting a paying customer." Emily's throat tightened. Everyone was staring, waiting. But she had no excuse. She had let her emotions take over, and now she was going to pay for it. The manager's face darkened. "You're fired. Now get out." A murmur of whispers rippled through the restaurant, some customers looking sympathetic, others scandalized. Emily felt her world tilting. Fired? Over him? She looked at the man, expecting him to be smug, victorious. But his expression had changed. He was watching her with an unreadable look, something between amusement and curiosity. She wanted to say something, wanted to fight back. But what was the point? She had lost control, and now she had lost her job. With her head held high, she untied her apron, tossed it onto the table, and walked out. But as she did, she heard him chuckle under his breath. Something told her this wasn't over. Emily walked out of the restaurant, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. The cool night air hit her face, but it did nothing to cool the burning heat of panic rising inside her. Fired. Just like that. Years of struggling, balancing rent, bills, and barely making it through each month. And now she had nothing. She had lost her temper for just 1 second. 1 second. And now her entire life was falling apart. She squeezed her fists as she kept walking, her mind racing with regret. What had she done? She had worked so hard to keep this job. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't where she wanted to be, but it paid the bills. And now? She had no backup plan, no savings, no idea how she was going to make it through the next month. She pulled out her phone with shaky fingers, scrolling through her contacts. Maybe Rachel, her best friend, could help. Maybe her landlord would give her a little more time for rent. Maybe... No, there were no maybes. She was in trouble. She inhaled sharply and dialed Rachel's number, pressing the phone against her ear as she turned onto a quiet street. "Hey, Em!" Rachel answered cheerfully, but as soon as she heard the silence on the other end, her voice changed. "What happened?" Emily let out a shaky breath. "I just got fired," she whispered. A pause. "What?" Rachel's voice shot up. "Wait, what happened?" "I thought you had another month before your manager was even thinking about layoffs." "It wasn't a layoff," Emily murmured, gripping her forehead. There was this guy, this arrogant rich guy, and he kept pushing and pushing, and I snapped. I slapped him." Another pause, then, "Oh my God, Emily. Tell me you're joking." "I wish I were," Emily groaned, sitting down on a bench. "I didn't even think, Rach. He was just so smug, treating me like garbage, and before I knew it, I hit him. And now I don't have a job. I don't know what I'm going to do." Rachel exhaled. "Damn. Okay. Look, we'll figure something out. But Em, you can't just go around slapping rich guys, no matter how much they deserve it." "I know," Emily muttered, rubbing her temples. "I know. But that wasn't even the worst part. The look on his face, the way he had smiled after she slapped him, it haunted her. Like he had enjoyed it. Like he had won something. And that was what scared her the most. What if he came back? What if he pressed charges? Her heart pounded at the thought. She didn't have money for a lawyer. She barely had money for rent. If he sued her, she was done. Completely done. Listen, just come over, Rachel said. We'll figure it out together. Maybe I can talk to my manager at the cafe. See if they need extra hands. Yeah, okay, Emily whispered, standing up. Thanks, Rach. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of it. That he wasn't done with her yet. And she was right. The next morning, Emily barely had time to process her situation before her phone exploded with messages. Notifications flooded her screen, texts, missed calls, social media alerts. Her stomach dropped. What the hell was going on? She tapped on one of the messages from Rachel. Emily, don't freak out, but you're kind of going viral. Viral? Emily's fingers shook as she clicked the link Rachel had sent. It was a video. Someone had recorded the slap. The caption? Waitress. Slaps rich jerk. Was she right or wrong? Emily's breath hitched as she hit play. There she was, standing in front of him, her face twisted with frustration. The sharp crack of her slap echoed through the restaurant. The way he had turned, his expression unreadable, his slow smile. It was all caught on camera. And then the manager fired her. She threw her apron on the table and stormed out. Millions of views, thousands of comments. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. She's my hero. Finally, someone put these entitled jerks in their place. No, she deserved to be fired. You don't just hit customers. Damn, did you see his smile at the end? He's up to something. Emily's stomach twisted. Up to something? She bit her lip, her pulse racing. She had humiliated him in front of the entire internet. And someone like him? Someone that rich, that powerful? He wasn't going to let it slide. Then, another message popped up from Rachel. He knows where you live. Her blood ran cold. Number. No. She clicked on Rachel's message, her heart hammering against her ribs. Rachel had sent a screenshot. A post from an account with his name. Interesting experience at a restaurant last night. I think it's time I made some changes. Starting with ownership. Stay tuned. Emily's breath hitched. Ownership? Number. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But as she scrolled down, her heart dropped. News articles were already spreading. Billionaire CEO Alexander Roth is rumored to be buying Maison d'Or, where he was slapped by a waitress. Revenge or business move. Billionaire set to acquire high-end restaurant chain after viral altercation. Emily's vision blurred. He was buying the restaurant. He wasn't suing her. He wasn't attacking her online. He was buying the entire place where she used to work. This wasn't just revenge. This was a message. She messed with the wrong man. And now, he was about to turn her world upside down. Emily could barely breathe as she reread the headlines flashing across her phone screen. Billionaire Alexander Roth buys Maison d'Or after viral altercation. It didn't make sense. It felt unreal. Just 2 days ago she was working there, fighting for tips, trying to survive. Now, the same man she had slapped was taking over the place. Was this his revenge? Her stomach twisted as she imagined stepping inside, only to find him sitting at her old manager's desk, smirking, waiting for her. No, it had to be a joke. But as she scrolled through the news, it became clear. It was very, very real. The news spread like wildfire, dominating business blogs and social media. Savage move, one commenter wrote. A man got slapped and decided to buy the whole restaurant. Goals. Another said, damn, imagine walking in for work and seeing the guy you slapped as your boss. Emily's hands were shaking. This was bad. Really bad. She had no way to escape this. But the worst part? He hadn't said a single word about her. No lawsuit. No public call-out. No mention of what had happened. He had simply bought the restaurant, and vanished from the public eye. That silence was more terrifying than anything. And then, just as she was trying to process it all, her phone rang. An unknown number. Her stomach dropped. Him? Number. It couldn't be. She hesitated, but something inside her told her she needed to answer. Hands trembling, she picked it up. Hello? Silence. A slow inhale. Then, a deep, composed voice she recognized instantly. Miss Carter. I believe we have unfinished business. Emily nearly dropped the phone. Her pulse thundered in her ears. It was him, Alexander Roth. Her voice caught in her throat. What do you want? A low chuckle. I'd rather discuss that in person. No, she blurted. Absolutely not. Interesting? He sounded amused. And yet, I haven't even said what I was going to offer. Emily gritted her teeth. If you think you can intimidate me— Intimidate? He interrupted smoothly. Oh no, Emily. This isn't intimidation. This is an invitation. Come to the restaurant tomorrow. Noon. I promise it'll be worth your time. I don't work there anymore, she snapped. No, he said. But I do. The line clicked dead. Emily sat frozen, the phone still pressed against her ear, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't just about revenge. He was playing a game. And worst of all, she had no idea what the rules were. The next morning, Emily stood outside Maison d'Or, her stomach twisted in knots. Everything looked the same, yet completely different. The restaurant, once an expensive but cozy fine dining spot, now had an eerie weight to it. The glass doors reflected the sun, making it impossible to see inside. Was he in there? Waiting? Watching? She shouldn't have come. But she had to know what he wanted. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The familiar scent of rosemary and freshly baked bread hit her instantly, but the warm welcome she had once known was gone. The entire staff stood stiff, their eyes darting toward the back office. No one spoke to her. No one smiled. They knew. They knew who she was, what she had done, and, most importantly, who was waiting for her. A host, someone new she didn't recognize, approached her nervously. Mr. Roth is expecting you, he said quickly before stepping aside. Emily swallowed hard and walked toward the office. Every step felt heavier. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. And there he was, sitting behind the desk. Her former manager's desk. The man she had slapped. Her new boss. He was relaxed, legs crossed, fingers interlocked on the desk, watching her like a predator who had just cornered its prey. Emily, he greeted smoothly, as if they were old friends. How nice of you to accept my invitation. Emily clenched her fists. What do you want? He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. I'll stand. Suit yourself. He tilted his head, studying her. You look nervous. Gee, I wonder why, she snapped. Maybe because the guy I slapped 2 days ago now owns my old job and is calling me in like I owe him something. A slow smirk curled on his lips. Do you? Her breath caught. What? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Do you owe me something, Emily? The way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. I don't owe you anything, she said firmly. You came after my job. You bought this place just to mess with me. If anything, you owe me an explanation. His smile didn't fade. You think this is about revenge? Isn't it? She challenged. You could have sued me. You could have ruined me, but instead, you did this. He tapped his fingers against the desk. What if I told you? This was never about ruining you. She stiffened. Then what is this about? His gaze locked onto hers. Opportunity. She frowned. For whom? For you, he said simply. She blinked. Excuse me? He leaned back. I didn't just buy this place to play games, Emily. Maison d'Or was already in trouble before I even stepped in. The former owner was looking for a buyer, and after what happened that night, I figured, why not? Why not? She echoed in disbelief. You don't even work in the restaurant industry. He smirked. I do now. That still doesn't explain why I'm here. Oh, but it does, he said. I need someone to help me run this place. Someone who actually knows the staff. Someone who understands what works and what doesn't. Someone who… No, she interrupted, shaking her head. Absolutely not. His brow lifted. You haven't even heard the offer. I don't care what the offer is, she snapped. I'm not working for you. He chuckled. You think you have a choice? Her stomach flipped. What's that supposed to mean? He stood up, walking around the desk until he was inches from her. He smelled like expensive cologne and quiet confidence, and it infuriated her. It means, he murmured, that whether you take the job or not, you're already part of this place's story. The media won't forget. The staff won't forget. And most importantly, I won't forget. Her pulse thundered. You're insane. Maybe, he said, tilting his head. Or maybe I just see something you don't. She swallowed hard. And what's that? Potential, he said simply. She scoffed. You don't know anything about me. Oh, but I do, he said. I know you fight for what you believe in. I know you don't back down. And I know you're better than this life you've been living. She hated how those words hit her. How they made her chest tighten. How they made something deep inside her whisper. What if he's right? But she couldn't trust him. Not yet. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need, he replied, stepping back. But don't take too long. This opportunity, it won't wait forever. She turned and stormed out, her mind racing. This wasn't revenge. This was something else entirely. But one thing was clear. Alexander Roth had just turned her world upside down. Emily stormed out of Alexander Roth's office, her mind racing, her breath uneven. She needed air. She needed to escape. But as soon as she stepped into the dining area, she realized something had changed. The staff, her former co-workers, weren't looking at her with sympathy anymore. They weren't whispering about her in hushed tones, offering subtle support. They were watching her with something entirely different in their eyes. Curiosity, uncertainty, fear. It hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't one of them anymore. Just 2 days ago, she was a struggling waitress trying to get through her shift. Now, she was the girl who slapped a billionaire. And he had come back for her. And not just to humiliate her. Not just to fire her. But to do something much, much worse. He had flipped the entire power dynamic in his favor. Emily, a familiar voice called. She turned to see Maddie, her closest friend at the restaurant, approaching with hesitant steps. What? What did he say to you? Emily swallowed hard. He offered me a job. Maddie's eyes widened. Wait, what? Emily nodded, her pulse thudding in her ears. He wants me to help run this place. Says he needs someone who knows the staff, someone who understands how things work. Maddie let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. That's insane. After what happened? After everything? Emily clenched her fists. I know. Are you going to take it? Maddie asked cautiously. Emily hesitated. That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? She wanted to say no. She wanted to walk out of this place and never look back. But deep down, she knew one thing for sure. If she left now, she'd never get another chance like this. And worse, he would win. I don't know, she admitted. But even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure she believed them. Because in that moment, as much as she wanted to fight it, a terrifying realization was creeping in. She wasn't just scared of Alexander Roth. She was scared of what she might become if she stepped into his world. The next morning, Emily couldn't shake the weight of the decision hanging over her. She had tossed and turned all night, replaying their conversation, analyzing every detail, every shift in his expression. Was this really just about business? Or was this about something else entirely? She didn't know. And that scared her. But what scared her more was the thought of not knowing. So when her phone buzzed with an incoming call, she already knew who it was before she even looked at the screen. Alexander. Her fingers hovered over the decline button. She shouldn't answer. She shouldn't engage. But against all logic, against all common sense, she swiped to accept the call. Emily. His voice was smooth, composed, like he had expected her to answer all along. Have you made a decision? No, she admitted. But I have questions. Good, he said. I prefer people who think before they act. Is that why you bought this place? She shot back. Because I'm pretty sure that was the most impulsive thing anyone's ever done in the history of the restaurant industry. A low chuckle. Maybe. Or maybe I just saw an opportunity and took it. An opportunity for what? She demanded. To prove a point? To get revenge? Revenge, he repeated, amused. Emily, if I wanted revenge, you'd know it. A shiver ran down her spine. Then what do you want? Meet me at the restaurant, he said. We'll discuss it in person. No games, she warned. No games, he agreed. But deep down, she knew that was a lie. With him, everything was a game, and she was already playing whether she liked it or not. When Emily walked into Maison d'Or later that afternoon, the tension in the air was palpable. The staff glanced at her, quickly looking away when she met their gazes. They were waiting, watching, wondering if she was about to take the deal. She made her way to the back office, her heart hammering with every step. The door was open, and there he was, sitting at the desk like he had owned it forever, exuding an effortless authority that made her want to either scream or run. Maybe both. He looked up as she entered, a slow smirk tugging at his lips. You came. You knew I would, she muttered, closing the door behind her. He didn't deny it. Sit. I'm fine standing. Suit yourself, he said, leaning back in his chair. Ask your questions. She took a deep breath. Why me? He raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Why me? She repeated, crossing her arms. You could hire anyone with real management experience, anyone with... I don't want just anyone, he interrupted. I want you. Her breath hitched. Why? Because you're the only person who's ever dared to stand up to me. His voice was calm, measured, but there was something else there, something deeper. Because you didn't just see me as a billionaire. You saw me as a man who was being an ass, and you called me out on it. She swallowed hard. And that impressed you? More than you know. Silence stretched between them, heavy, unspoken truths hanging in the air. Finally, he spoke again. I'm not offering you a job out of pity, Emily. I'm offering you a position of power, a seat at the table, a chance to be something more than just another waitress struggling to get by. And if I say no? She challenged. He studied her for a long moment before answering. Then you walk away, and you go back to a life where you let the world dictate your worth instead of claiming it for yourself. Her heart pounded. And if I say yes? His smirk returned, slow and deliberate. Then you step into a world where you make the rules. The weight of his words settled over her like a storm cloud. This was it. The moment of choice. The moment that could change everything. Her past self would have walked away. But the woman standing in front of him now? She wasn't so sure anymore. She took a breath. A deep, shaky breath. And then, against every instinct, against every fear, she did something she never thought she would. She extended her hand. I'm in. His eyes flickered with something unreadable before he reached out, clasping her hand in his. His grip was firm. Unshakable. Welcome to the game, Emily. And just like that, everything changed. Emily had no idea what she had just signed up for. The moment she shook Alexander Roth's hand, sealing the deal, she thought she had won. She thought she had taken control of her destiny, stepping into power instead of running from it. But the reality? It hit her harder than she ever imagined. Because now, every single person at Maison d'Or was watching her, waiting for her to fail. The first morning in her new role, she walked in, head high, shoulders squared, ignoring the whispers, the judgment, the resentment radiating from every corner. The staff didn't see her as their leader. They saw her as a waitress who got lucky. And Alexander? He wasn't about to make things easier for her. If anything, he was testing her, pushing her limits, throwing her into the deep end to see if she'd sink or swim. "You wanted this, didn't you?" His voice was smooth as he leaned against the bar, watching her struggle with the inventory system. "Then prove you deserve it!" Emily gritted her teeth, refusing to let him see her crack. She spent hours learning the restaurant's financials, the supply chains, the staffing schedules, and by the end of the night, her head was pounding. But quitting? That wasn't an option. Because every time she thought about walking away, she remembered the look in Alexander's eyes when he gave her this chance. It wasn't kindness. It was a challenge, and she wasn't about to lose. The first real blow came 2 weeks in. A Friday night. Fully booked. Kitchen staff was overwhelmed. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. And of course, that's exactly what happened. The chef, furious over a last-minute change in the menu, quit on the spot. Dishes piled up, customers started complaining, and Emily had seconds to decide. Let the place collapse, or step in. She didn't hesitate. Rolling up her sleeves, she stormed into the kitchen, grabbed an apron, and started cooking. She wasn't a chef, but she knew the menu by heart. She worked alongside the remaining staff, pulling the team together, shouting orders, moving like she had been doing this for years. And by the end of the night, when the last plate was served, she stood there, exhausted, covered in flour and sweat, but victorious. The staff? They were staring at her like they had seen a ghost. Even Alexander looked impressed. "Not bad," he admitted as she walked past him, barely able to stand. "I didn't think you had it in you." "Then maybe you should start rethinking everything you assumed about me," she shot back, not stopping. She wasn't doing this for him. She wasn't doing this to prove something to anyone else. She was doing this for herself. But just as she started to believe she could handle this, the real attack came. And this time, it wasn't just about the job. It was personal. An article. Front page of a gossip site. From waitress to boss, but at what cost? It painted her as nothing more than Alexander Roth's latest plaything, a woman who had charmed her way into power. The comments were even worse. She must have slept with him. There's no way a waitress gets a job like that unless she's on her knees for it. The humiliation burned through her like acid. But the worst part? She didn't know if Alexander had anything to do with it. Had he leaked this? Was this another one of his games? Or was this just the world reminding her that no matter what she did, people would always reduce her to nothing? She stormed into his office, slamming the article on his desk. "Did you know about this?" He glanced at it, completely unfazed. "Of course." Her stomach dropped. "You knew?" "I have eyes everywhere, Emily," he said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "I knew before you did." "And you didn't think to warn me?" she demanded. "Why? So you could have time to cry about it?" His words were ice. "People will always talk, Emily. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Her hands curled into fists. "I'm going to prove them all wrong." He smirked. "Good answer." The fire inside her reignited. She worked twice as hard, shut out the noise, ignored the stares, and fought to earn every ounce of respect she could. And slowly, it worked. The staff started looking at her differently. They started listening. They started trusting. She wasn't just Alexander Roth's new pet project anymore. She was their boss. But just when she thought she had finally gained control, she realized something terrifying. She had been so busy proving herself that she hadn't noticed the way Alexander was watching her. The way his smirk had started to fade, replaced by something deeper. Something she didn't quite understand. And worse? She wasn't sure she wanted to fight it. Emily had spent weeks trying to understand Alexander Roth, but the more she observed him, the less sense he made. He wasn't just an arrogant billionaire who liked to play power games. There was something deeper. Something he hid behind that cold, calculating smirk. He was ruthless in business, unforgiving in competition. But now and then, there were cracks in his armor. Moments where his eyes darkened, where his jaw clenched just a little too tight, where his usual cocky demeanor slipped away into something almost haunted. It was a late night at the restaurant when she finally caught him off guard. He was sitting in his office, staring at a file, but he wasn't reading. His hands were clenched, his expression unreadable. Emily had planned to drop off the reports and leave, but curiosity burned through her. "You look like you've just seen a ghost," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Alexander didn't even glance up. "Go home, Emily." "Not until you tell me why you're looking at that file like it might kill you." Silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he closed the folder and exhaled. "You don't know when to back off, do you?" She smirked. "Not when something doesn't add up." His eyes flickered to hers, a war raging behind them, and for the first time, she saw it. Pain. Real, raw, and buried deep. But instead of answering, he stood abruptly, grabbed his coat, and walked out, leaving her alone in his office. Emily glanced at the file he had left behind, the temptation unbearable. Against her better judgment, she flipped it open. And what she saw made her breath hitch. Alexander Roth wasn't born into wealth. He was born into nothing. The documents detailed an orphanage in one of the roughest parts of the city. His birth name wasn't even Alexander Roth. It was Elias Carter. His mother had abandoned him when he was just a baby. His father, unknown. The only family he had ever known was a system that chewed him up and spat him out. Foster homes, juvenile detention, and a list of disciplinary records that went on for pages. And then, at 18, a legal name change. Alexander Roth was a self-made man in the most brutal way possible. No inheritance, no safety net. Just a kid who had clawed his way out of the darkness and built himself into something untouchable. Emily's heart pounded as she pieced it together. His arrogance wasn't just arrogance, it was survival. His ruthlessness wasn't just for show. It was all he had ever known. She barely had time to process before she heard his voice behind her. "Enjoying yourself?" Her blood ran cold. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. But this wasn't the Alexander she was used to. This wasn't the smug, untouchable billionaire. This was someone far more dangerous. Someone who had just caught her looking at his deepest secret. "You changed your name," she said softly, holding up the file. "You erased your past." His jaw tightened, his eyes like steel. "And yet here you are, digging it up." Emily swallowed hard, but she didn't back down. "Why did you keep this hidden?" A humorless chuckle escaped his lips as he stepped closer. "Because people like you wouldn't understand." "Try me," she challenged. Something flickered in his expression. Something like anger, or maybe desperation. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair before finally speaking. "When you grow up with nothing, you either let the world break you, or you learn how to break it first." His voice was quieter now, but carried more weight than anything he had ever said to her. "I chose the second option." Emily's heart twisted. She had always assumed Alexander had been born with a silver spoon in his mouth, that he had never known struggle. But now, she saw the truth. He wasn't just rich, he was forged in fire. "You don't have to keep punishing the world," she whispered. His eyes darkened. "The world deserves it." "Do I?" she shot back. "Do the people here?" His gaze flickered, just for a second. "I don't trust people, Emily," Because nobody trusted you, she countered. Silence stretched between them. Then, he turned away. You should go. But Emily didn't move. Because for the first time since she had met him, she saw the truth. Alexander Roth wasn't just playing a game. He was protecting himself from something far worse. And now that she knew, she wasn't sure if she could ever see him the same way again. Emily didn't know when it started. Maybe it was the night she discovered his past, or maybe it was the way his presence had started to linger in her thoughts, refusing to be ignored. But something had shifted between them. Something unspoken. Something dangerous. She felt it every time their eyes met, in the way he looked at her, not with the cold arrogance he usually wore like armor, but with something darker, something unreadable. It was a storm, waiting to break. And tonight, it finally did. The restaurant was empty, the lights dimmed, the silence stretching between them like a thin, fragile thread ready to snap. Alexander leaned against the bar, his sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened. His gaze was locked on her, unreadable, intense. Emily swallowed, gripping the edge of the counter. She should leave. She should turn around and walk out before she made a mistake. But her feet refused to move. You're staring, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. A smirk curled at the corner of his lips. So are you. Her breath hitched. His voice was lower than usual, rough around the edges, as if he was holding something back. She should say something, break the tension, and remind herself who he was. But all she could think about was how the air between them felt charged, electric, like a fire waiting for a single spark. Do you enjoy making my life difficult? He murmured, stepping closer. Her pulse hammered. I could ask you the same thing. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You don't belong in my world, Emily. Then stop pulling me into it. Silence. Thick, heavy, dangerous. His gaze flickered to her lips, and her breath stuttered. It was the smallest movement, barely noticeable, but it changed everything. Because in that moment, she knew. He wanted her. And God help her. She wanted him too. This is a mistake, she whispered. Probably, he agreed, his voice rough. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. The space between them felt unbearable, suffocating, like gravity itself was pulling them together. She should leave. She should turn around and walk away before this goes too far. But then, he reached for her. And the world stopped. His fingers brushed against her jaw, light as a whisper. But it sent a shiver down her spine. She sucked in a breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. Tell me to stop, he murmured. She couldn't. Because for the first time since she met him, she didn't want him to. She didn't care about his arrogance, his sharp edges, or the fact that he had once been her enemy. All she cared about was the way he was looking at her now, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. I can't, she admitted, barely a whisper. A muscle twitched in his jaw. His control was slipping. She could see it in the way his fingers tightened slightly, in the way his breathing had turned uneven. He was fighting this just as much as she was. But some battles weren't meant to be won. And in the next second, the tension snapped. His lips crashed against hers, fierce, desperate, like he had been starving for this moment. Heat exploded through her, her fingers tangling in his shirt, pulling him closer. He groaned against her mouth, his hands sliding to her waist, gripping her like he never wanted to let go. It was chaos. It was fire. It was everything she had tried to deny, and it was too late to stop. Emily barely had time to process what had happened between her and Alexander before everything around them came crashing down. It started with a single phone call. One moment, the restaurant was running smoothly. The scent of fresh bread and seared steak filling the air. The gentle hum of customers chatting creating the usual warm atmosphere. And the next, chaos erupted. Alexander's phone buzzed sharply in his pocket, and as soon as he answered, his entire body tensed. His expression turned to stone. What? He barked into the phone, his jaw clenching. Emily froze. She had never seen that look on his face before. Sharp, deadly, like a man on the edge of war. The staff around them noticed too. The usual energy of the restaurant shifted. Something was wrong. Alexander slammed his phone down on the counter, his hands balled into fists. "What happened?" Emily asked cautiously, stepping closer. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Health inspection. They just shut us down." The words hit her like a punch. "What?" "Someone filed a complaint," he gritted out, his voice tight with anger. "They sent inspectors in the middle of dinner service. Found minor violations, but enough to close us temporarily." Emily's stomach twisted. That wasn't just bad. That was devastating. The customers had begun whispering, sensing the shift in energy. Some stood up, murmuring amongst themselves, while others checked their phones. Then, the first notification popped up. A breaking news alert. Exclusive. Popular fine dining spot shut down after shocking health violation report. Emily's blood ran cold. It was already spreading, fast. Alexander's eyes burned with fury as he yanked his coat off the chair. "Someone set us up," he muttered, his voice dangerously low. Emily followed him as he stormed toward the kitchen. "What do you mean, set us up? Who would—" "My competition," he snapped. "I took this restaurant from them when I bought it. They want it back." Her heart pounded. She had heard rumors about cutthroat business rivalries, but this was beyond ruthless. They had planted something, bribed someone, or worse, made sure the inspection happened at the worst possible moment. "What do we do?" she asked, ignoring the way her hands shook. His jaw tightened. "We fight." He pulled out his phone and started making calls. "Get legal down here. Now." The employees were still in shock, murmuring amongst themselves, but Emily stepped up. "Everyone, listen up." The room went silent. "This is not the end. We're going to fix this, but we need to stay calm. No one speaks to the media. No one posts anything online. We handle this in-house." She turned to the kitchen staff. "Check every station, every ingredient. If something was planted, we need to find it." Alexander shot her a look, something unreadable flashing in his eyes, but he didn't stop her. He let her take control. And for the first time since this mess started, she felt like they weren't completely drowning. But then, the front doors burst open. A swarm of reporters flooded in, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward. "Mr. Blackwood, is it true your restaurant failed the health inspection? Was there food poisoning involved? Are you planning to shut down permanently?" The questions hit like bullets, but Alexander didn't flinch. He straightened his suit, his expression unreadable, his entire presence radiating power. Then he smirked. Emily blinked. That was not the reaction she expected. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with confidence, "you're all wasting your time." A hush fell over the room. The reporters hesitated, confused. "We're not shutting down," Alexander continued. "In fact, I'll be hosting an exclusive invite-only dinner the moment we reopen. And you know what?" He leaned in slightly. "You're not invited." The cameras went wild. Emily barely contained her shock. He wasn't just fighting back, he was turning this into a spectacle. And from the way the internet was already eating it up, it was working. But just as she thought they were gaining control, another alert flashed across her phone screen. "Breaking! Anonymous source leaks restaurant's internal documents. Scandal gets worse." Emily's breath caught. Alexander's face darkened. The war had just begun. Emily had been through chaos before, but nothing compared to what was happening now. The restaurant scandal had already pushed them to the edge, but the latest leak? It had thrown them into a firestorm. The headlines were everywhere. "Breaking! Anonymous source claims new restaurant owner, hiding shocking past." Who is Alexander Blackwood? The truth might surprise you. Scandalous secrets. Is he really who he says he is? Emily gripped her phone, scrolling through the endless flood of articles, comments, and speculations. Theories were flying, some wild, some dangerously close to the truth. People were digging into Alexander's past, but no one seemed to have the full story. Not yet. The staff whispered amongst themselves, the restaurant buzzing with nervous energy. Emily turned to Alexander, who sat at his office desk, scrolling through his phone with a face of stone. His usual arrogance was absent. He was unreadable. That scared her more than anything. "Alexander," she said hesitantly. "What's going on? What aren't you telling me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up, grabbed his coat, and motioned for her to follow. "Come with me." Emily hesitated but followed him out of the restaurant. He led her to his car, sleek and black, and the moment they got in, he sped off. "Where are we going?" she demanded. His grip tightened on the wheel. "If the world is about to find out who I am, I'd rather you hear it from me first." The ride was silent, tension thick in the air. Emily's mind raced. What could be so bad that he had kept it hidden all this time? The car finally stopped in front of an enormous estate. Not just any estate. A palace. Emily's breath hitched. This couldn't be real. "Alexander," she whispered, staring at the towering gates, the royal crest gleaming under the streetlights. "What is this place?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "This is my home." Her heart pounded. "Your home?" He turned to face her fully, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Emily, I'm not just some businessman who got lucky. I was born into this. The gate suddenly opened, cutting him off. Within seconds, guards in pristine uniforms appeared, followed by an older man in a perfectly tailored suit. "Your Highness," the man greeted with a deep bow. Emily's entire body went rigid. "Your Highness?" She looked at Alexander in shock, waiting for him to correct the man. To say this was some misunderstanding. But he didn't. He simply sighed and rubbed his temple. "I was hoping to have this conversation privately," he muttered before turning to Emily. His gaze was intense, like he was bracing for her reaction. "Emily, I'm a prince." The words echoed in her ears, but they barely made sense. Prince? That was impossible. He was just Alexander, the arrogant, frustratingly handsome man who had turned her life upside down. He wasn't royalty. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That doesn't make sense." Alexander gave a humorless chuckle. "Trust me, I wish it didn't." She stared at him, her heart hammering. "So, everything I thought I knew about you was a lie?" His jaw clenched. "I never lied to you. I just never told you the full story." "That's the same thing, Alexander," she snapped. "Why would you hide something this huge?" He exhaled, glancing toward the palace. "Because I walked away from it. From all of it." His voice was quieter now, almost haunted. "I never wanted this life. The titles, the politics, the expectations. I hated it. I wanted to be more than just a name in a history book. So I left. I built my empire on my terms." Emily's mind was spinning. "And now?" "Now," he muttered, glancing at his phone as another notification lit up the screen. "The world has dragged me back in." Before she could respond, the palace doors swung open. A woman, tall, regal, and breathtakingly elegant, stopped out. Her expression was unreadable, but her sharp eyes took in Emily with obvious scrutiny. "So," the woman said smoothly, "this is the girl." Emily's stomach twisted. "The girl?" Alexander's grip on Emily's wrist tightened slightly, a silent reassurance. "Mother," he greeted stiffly. "Emily, this is Queen Eleanor. Queen, not Duchess, not Countess. Queen." Emily felt like the ground had just disappeared beneath her feet. Queen Eleanor's gaze never wavered. "The press has been relentless," she said, ignoring Alexander's greeting. "You are aware that your secret is no longer a secret?" Alexander exhaled sharply. I gathered that, yes. And what? The queen asked, her voice dangerously calm. Do you plan to do about it? Emily felt completely out of place, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from Alexander. How would he answer? What was his next move? He straightened his shoulders, his usual arrogance slipping back into place. I'll handle it. Queen Eleanor arched a delicate brow. You'll handle it? Yes, he said firmly. On my terms. The queen studied him for a long moment before her gaze flickered to Emily. And her? Emily's breath caught. She didn't know what the queen was asking. Was she a problem to be dealt with? A distraction? A threat? Alexander hesitated. It was only for a second, but Emily felt it. And in that moment, she realized something chilling. This wasn't just about a restaurant scandal anymore. This was about legacy, duty, power. And in this world, she didn't belong. But before she could say a word, the front gates burst open. Reporters, photographers, flashing cameras. The press had found them. Alexander! Prince Alexander, do you have a statement? Who is the woman with you? Is she your fiancée? Are you reclaiming your royal title? The questions came rapid fire, cameras clicking, blinding flashes lighting up the night. Emily stood frozen, her heart racing. Alexander barely flinched. He turned to his mother. This is exactly why I left, he muttered. The queen's expression didn't change. And yet, here you are. Emily wasn't sure what would happen next. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to know. All she knew was that her life, everything she thought she knew, had just changed forever. The weight of the situation settled heavily on Emily's shoulders. Her world, the life she had meticulously built around the restaurant, had just come crashing down in the blink of an eye. Alexander's public reveal, the hidden truths about his royal lineage, had shaken her to the core. She had thought she knew him, but now, she wasn't so sure. Her thoughts raced as she stood at the window of her small apartment, staring out into the city. The bustling streets felt so distant, so foreign to her now. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted without warning, and she was left struggling to regain her balance. How had she gotten here? A simple waitress at a small diner, caught up in a whirlwind romance with a man who wasn't just a businessman but a prince. A man whose entire world was different from hers. Emily? His voice came from the doorway, low and tentative. She didn't turn around. Can we talk? She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him to leave, to walk away, because deep down, she knew that whatever they had was now tainted. Everything had changed. I'm not sure there's anything left to say, she replied quietly. But she could hear the pain in her voice, the cracks in her facade. She did want to talk. She did want answers. Her heart ached with the uncertainty that now consumed her. Slowly, she turned to face him. His eyes, deep, intense eyes, had a sorrow in them she hadn't noticed before. Alexander was no longer the arrogant, untouchable man she had met months ago. The man standing before her now was vulnerable, searching for something he couldn't find. I'm sorry, he said, stepping closer. I never meant for things to get this complicated. Complicated? She whispered, her voice thick with emotion. This isn't complicated, Alexander. This is impossible. She shook her head, taking a step back. I can't do this. I can't live in a world where I'm constantly surrounded by your past, your title, your legacy. I'm not that person. I never was. Alexander's expression faltered. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away instinctively. Emily, please, he pleaded. You don't understand. This isn't just about titles or money. I've been running away from my responsibility my entire life, but that doesn't mean I'm a different person. I love you. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had always known there was something different about him, but to hear him say it out loud, it changed everything. The truth, his truth, was right there in front of her. He wasn't just a man with a mysterious past. He wasn't just some rich, arrogant guy trying to impress her. He was a prince, tied to a world she could never be a part of. She closed her eyes, trying to process the flood of emotions. "But you lied to me," she said quietly. "You kept so much from me, and now it feels like you're asking me to give up everything I've worked for just to be part of your world. And I don't know if I can." Alexander's face twisted in pain, but he nodded slowly as if he understood the weight of her words. "I never wanted to put you in this position," he said, his voice raw. "I thought I could keep this life separate from you. But I was wrong. I can't ask you to change your life for me, and I'm not asking you to. I just want a chance to show you that I can be more than the man you think I am. But I can't do that if you walk away." His words hung in the air between them, thick with unspoken promises and unresolved tension. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. What was she supposed to do with this? Could she truly walk away from everything she had built just to follow him into a world that was foreign and overwhelming? Could she sacrifice her dreams for his? For a life that seemed too grand to be real? She thought about the restaurant, the life she had fought for, the relationships she had built. Was she willing to throw it all away? The fear of losing herself, of giving up her autonomy, was too strong. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the pull she still felt toward him. The connection that had sparked between them, the way he had made her feel seen, important, and loved. But was love enough? Her heart ached as she thought about all the dreams she had worked toward. She had come so far. And now, just when she was beginning to feel like she had a life of her own, everything was changing. The decision felt impossible. She couldn't shake the feeling that if she chose him, she would lose everything that had given her strength in the past. And if she chose herself, she would lose him. Perhaps forever. "I need time to think," she finally said, her voice breaking the silence. She turned away, needing space to breathe, to think clearly. But she could feel him still there, watching her. His presence loomed large, reminding her of everything that could be. And yet, the reality of their lives made it feel so out of reach. She didn't know what the right decision was, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. If she chose him, would she be able to live with herself? Would she be able to be part of his world? Or would she regret it, knowing she had given up so much of herself for a chance at something that might never be hers? Alexander didn't argue. He simply stood there, waiting, silent, patient. And Emily realized something in that moment. Maybe the decision wasn't just about him or her. Maybe it was about who she wanted to become. She was standing at the crossroads of her life, and the future was in her hands. Would she walk away, leaving everything behind? Or would she fight for a future she never thought was possible? The weight of the decision felt heavier with each passing hour. Alexander sat in his office, the expansive view of the city before him, but his mind was far from the skyline. His thoughts were consumed by one person, Emily. She had been on his mind ever since the confrontation, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, that look of pain, of betrayal. She had been everything to him, and yet, he had failed her in ways he could never fully comprehend. He had to choose. The boardroom had never felt colder, the sterile walls and the endless meetings no longer providing the comfort they once had. All those years of building his empire, fighting for the title he never wanted, and suddenly, everything seemed irrelevant. Was it all worth it? He had everything: money, power, influence. But none of it mattered when Emily wasn't there by his side. His phone buzzed on the desk. The name flashing on the screen made his heart race. It was Emily again. He had ignored her calls earlier, unable to face the uncertainty in his own heart. He couldn't lie to her any longer. The truth was, all the success he had achieved in business felt hollow without her. He picked up the phone and stared at her name. His thumb hovered over the green icon, but he couldn't bring himself to press it. Not yet. Was he ready for the conversation? Was he ready to admit that his life had no meaning without her? The silence in the room was deafening, and as he leaned back in his chair, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was at a crossroads, a point where his entire future depended on this decision. Should he choose Emily, who had captured his heart from the very beginning? Or should he choose the life he had built, the empire that demanded his attention and devotion? The years he had spent building his business came rushing back. Every sacrifice, every compromise. The endless nights spent poring over financial reports, building partnerships, and expanding his reach. But what had he really built? A legacy of wealth and power that no one cared about. Sure, people admired him from afar. But was it love? Or was it just admiration for his success? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his wealth had created a facade, a barrier between him and the life he truly wanted. And in the process, he had lost what mattered most. He had lost Emily. Emily had always been different. From the moment he met her at the restaurant, he had felt something he hadn't felt before. She wasn't impressed by his money or his name. She saw him for who he truly was, beneath the layers of his business persona. She had opened his eyes to a different way of living, a way of living that wasn't defined by success or titles. But somewhere along the way, he had let the pressures of his business take over. He had allowed his responsibilities as a businessman to overshadow his feelings for her. And now, it might be too late to fix it. He stood up from his desk and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling city below. The lights sparkled in the distance, a reminder of the world he had worked so hard to conquer. But at that moment, it didn't matter. He realized that none of this mattered if Emily wasn't with him. She had shown him what true happiness could be like. And now, all he had to do was find the courage to let go of everything he had worked so hard for. Could he do that? His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from his assistant, reminding him of the upcoming meeting with potential investors, the final step towards securing the future of his empire. The deal was a big one, a deal that could set him up for life. But as he read the message, he felt nothing. No excitement, no rush, just an overwhelming sense of dread. What was the point of all this? What good was success if he couldn't share it with someone who mattered? He thought about his father's words, the endless lessons he had been taught about the importance of success. A man's worth is measured by his accomplishments and his wealth, his father had said time and time again. But Alexander had come to realize that his father's definition of success wasn't his own. His worth was measured by love, by the connections he built, and by the people he cared about. The decision weighed heavily on him. Business or love? Could he really walk away from everything he had built to follow his heart? Was it possible to have both? Or would he have to choose? The thought of leaving everything behind terrified him. But the thought of losing Emily forever was unbearable. He had to face the truth. His heart had already chosen. With a deep breath, Alexander grabbed his coat and left his office. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know what the future would hold. But he was ready to fight for Emily. He wasn't going to let his past mistakes define his future. He would take the chance, even if it meant starting over. The world of business, the empire, the meetings, none of that mattered without love. And now, more than ever, he knew he had to make things right. As he stepped into the elevator and made his way down to the lobby, he called her once more. This time, he was ready. It was time to fight for love. Alexander stood outside the restaurant, looking at the familiar place where it all began. His heart pounded in his chest as memories of Emily flooded back. He hadn't seen her in days, and the ache of not being with her was gnawing at him. Every moment apart from her felt like an eternity, and he realized how much he had taken her for granted. The decision to buy the restaurant, to turn her world upside down, seemed like the right one at the time. But now, standing here, he understood how wrong he had been. The wealth, the power, none of it mattered. All that mattered was winning her back. He had tried to call her, to talk to her, but she had shut him out. How could he fix the damage he had caused? He had been arrogant, self-absorbed, and blind to the things that truly mattered. It wasn't until she was gone that he realized what he had lost. The love of his life. And now, he would do whatever it took to win her back. He had learned a lot about himself in the last few days. The business empire, the wealth, the prestige. None of it had given him the happiness he craved. It was Emily who had brought joy into his life, and without her, everything felt empty. He had taken her for granted, treated her like an afterthought, and now he was going to make up for it. Alexander had a plan. It wasn't just a simple apology. No. It was a grand gesture. Something that would show her just how much he cared. Something that would prove he was willing to fight for her, no matter the cost. The restaurant had always been a special place for them. It was where they first met, where they shared their laughs, their stories, and their dreams. It held so many memories. Memories that he wanted to rebuild with her. But first, he needed to show her that he had changed. That he was no longer the arrogant businessman who cared only about profits. He needed to show her the man he had become. The man who was ready to prioritize love over everything else. Alexander had reached out to his closest friends, people who knew Emily, and together, they had come up with the perfect plan. A surprise that would take her breath away. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. He had hurt her, and winning her back would require more than just words. It would require actions. Bold, sincere actions that would demonstrate his commitment to her, to their love. The night of the grand gesture arrived. The restaurant was closed for the evening, but Alexander had made arrangements to have it decorated in a way that would leave Emily speechless. He had taken great care in making everything perfect. The soft lighting, the flowers, the music. Every detail had been planned with her in mind. This wasn't just a grand gesture. It was a symbol of how much he cared for her and how far he was willing to go to make things right. As he waited for Emily to arrive, his nerves threatened to overtake him. His palms were sweaty and his heart was racing. What if she didn't come? What if she rejected him once again? But he pushed those thoughts aside. He had made his choice, and now, there was no turning back. He wasn't going to give up on her. Not this time. The door opened, and Emily walked in, her eyes scanning the room. She looked stunning, as always, but there was a sadness in her eyes that tugged at his heart. She had been hurt, and it was his fault. The weight of that guilt was almost too much to bear, but he knew he had to face it if he was ever going to have a chance with her again. She froze when she saw him standing at the center of the room. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes betrayed the confusion, the pain, and the uncertainty she was feeling. He stepped forward, heart pounding, and took a deep breath before speaking. "Emily," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've made mistakes. But I'm here tonight to show you that I'm ready to do whatever it takes to make things right. I've spent too long building an empire I don't need. What I need, what I want, is you. Only you." He paused, watching her carefully, searching for any sign that she might still care. "I've been a fool, Emily, a selfish fool. But I've learned that no amount of money, no business deal, no power is worth anything without you. You make me a better man, and I'm willing to prove that to you. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Please, give me a chance." For a long moment, Emily didn't say anything. The silence stretched on, and Alexander's heart sank. Had he miscalculated? Had he pushed too far? He waited anxiously, holding his breath. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, Alexander. You hurt me so much. I don't know if I can forgive you." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, but he didn't back down. He stepped closer to her, determined to prove that he was a man worth loving. "I understand," he said, his voice full of raw emotion, "and I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I promise you, I will spend every day earning your trust. I'll spend every moment showing you how much you mean to me. If you'll just give me that chance." Emily looked at him for a long time, her gaze flickering between his eyes and the room around them. The tension in the air was palpable, but as she took a step closer, her expression softened, just slightly. I don't know if I can trust you again," she said. But there was a trace of uncertainty in her voice now, a crack in her walls. Alexander reached out, gently taking her hand. "You don't have to trust me right away, Emily. But I'm asking you to trust that I'm willing to fight for us. Fight for you. Because you're worth fighting for." For a moment, Emily was silent. Then, slowly, she nodded, a small but hopeful smile tugging at her lips. Maybe we can start over. But this time, you'll have to prove it to me every day." And with that, Alexander felt the weight on his chest lift slightly. It wasn't a guarantee that everything would be perfect, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. A second chance at love. Emily stood in the doorway, watching as Alexander paced back and forth. Her heart was heavy with uncertainty. This was the moment of truth, the final test of everything they had fought for. Could they work together? Could they truly put aside the past and build a future as partners? Not just in love, but in life. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, apologies, and attempts at rebuilding trust. She had tried to keep her distance, to protect her heart from getting hurt again. But every time she saw him, she was reminded of the man he had become. A man who had changed, who was willing to do whatever it took to prove his love. But could she trust him? Could she take that final step and allow herself to be vulnerable again? Alexander turned and met her gaze. His face was filled with determination, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. He had been honest with her, more so than he had ever been. And now, standing here, he was about to make the most important decision of his life. Would he be able to prove that he was truly ready for this? That he wasn't just doing this for her, but for them, as a couple, as equals? "I know this isn't going to be easy," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know I've hurt you. I've been selfish, and I've taken you for granted. But I want you to know that I'm ready. I'm ready to build something real, something lasting. If you're willing to give me that chance, I swear I won't let you down." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had heard these words before, but this time they felt different. There was no arrogance, no ulterior motive. This was a man who was willing to put in the effort, to put everything on the line. It wasn't just about money, power, or control. It was about them, about their relationship, and about a future they could build together. She had to admit, part of her wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe in the man who stood before her now. The man who was showing her that he was capable of change. But another part of her was afraid of letting down her guard, of opening herself up to the possibility of being hurt again. "I want to believe you, Alexander," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can go through that kind of pain again." He stepped forward, his expression softening. "I understand," he said gently. "And I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm asking you to trust me, to trust that I'm willing to work for us. I can't promise it will be perfect, but I can promise that I will never stop trying." The room was silent for a long moment as Emily processed his words. Could she trust him again? Could she allow herself to be vulnerable after everything that had happened? And more importantly, could they truly work together as a couple, not just in their relationship, but in their future endeavors? She knew that this decision wasn't just about their love. It was about their ability to work together as equals. Could she stand by his side as a partner in both life and business, without feeling inferior or overshadowed by his wealth and success? Could they balance their relationship with their professional one? Emily had spent so much of her life building her independence, her career, her dreams. The idea of giving up some of that control, of merging her world with his, was terrifying. But she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. She had loved him once, and maybe, just maybe, she could love him again. "I want to try," she finally said, her voice steady now, filled with a sense of purpose. "But it's not going to be easy. We have to be willing to put in the work, to trust each other fully, and to share the same vision for the future. I won't just follow you, Alexander. We have to be partners in this, equal partners. No more power struggles. No more secrets." A smile broke across Alexander's face, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of hope. This was the beginning of something new, a new chapter, a new chance to rewrite their story together. "I agree," he said, his voice full of conviction. "We will do this together. I promise you. We will build something that lasts. We will make this work, no matter what it takes." The words hung in the air, a promise between them. This wasn't just about love anymore. This was about trust, teamwork, and the willingness to compromise. They both knew it wouldn't be easy. They had their challenges ahead. Navigating their professional and personal lives as equals would be a test of its own. But they were both willing to take it. As they stood there, facing each other, it was clear that they had both grown. They had learned from their mistakes, faced their fears, and now, they were ready for the final test. The question was no longer about whether they could work together. It was about how they would work together, and how they would make their relationship stronger for it. They didn't need a fairy tale ending. They didn't need perfection. All they needed was each other, and the willingness to put in the effort. And that, Emily realized, was enough. As Alexander reached out and took her hand, Emily knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next, hand in hand. The city had always been a place where dreams were made or broken. Its fast-paced streets, shining skyscrapers, and endless opportunities had always attracted ambitious souls, hoping to leave a mark on the world. But amidst all the hustle, there was one love story that had captured the hearts of everyone. Their love story. It had started with a clash. A moment of heated exchange between two people from completely different worlds. Emily, the strong-willed waitress, had been caught in a battle of pride with Alexander, the arrogant businessman. The tension between them was undeniable, but what followed was a journey neither of them had expected. A journey of growth, self-discovery, and a love that would change not only their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. For months, Emily and Alexander had fought their personal demons, navigating their way through trust issues, miscommunication, and personal insecurities. Yet despite the challenges, there was something undeniable between them. A spark. A connection that neither of them could ignore. It was a slow process, one that involved both of them taking risks and being vulnerable. They had to confront their pasts, let go of their egos, and truly listen to each other. Emily had come from a humble background, always striving for independence and success on her own terms. Alexander, on the other hand, had been used to getting everything he wanted, including the respect and admiration of others. But something shifted between them. Emily had taught him the value of humility, of earning respect rather than commanding it. Alexander, in turn, had shown her the importance of believing in herself, of not letting her fears hold her back from chasing her dreams. Together, they had become stronger than they had ever been apart. It wasn't long before they began working together, side by side, both professionally and personally. Their journey was not without its challenges. Running a business together required constant communication, compromise, and mutual respect. But they were committed to making it work. And as their business grew, so did their love. They had found a way to blend their personal and professional lives in a way that felt natural, where neither was sacrificed for the other. The city began to take notice of their story. People marveled at how two people who seemed so different had managed to build something so beautiful together. It wasn't just about the business they had built. It was about their love, their partnership, and the way they supported each other. They became an example of what true love looked like in the modern world. A love that wasn't just about romantic gestures, but about growth, teamwork, and overcoming obstacles together. Soon, their story became the talk of the town. People looked up to them, not just as a power couple, but as a symbol of resilience and the power of love. They became known for their charitable efforts, using their newfound success to give back to the community that had once overlooked them. Emily and Alexander had become more than just a love story. They had become a beacon of hope for others who felt like they didn't belong, for those who had been told they couldn't make it. But despite all the attention and admiration, Emily and Alexander remained grounded. They never lost sight of what had brought them together: their shared values, their desire to be better people, and their love for one another. They knew that they had something special, something worth protecting. One evening, as they stood on the rooftop of their building, overlooking the city that had become their home, Alexander turned to Emily, his expression softening. The city lights sparkled around them, but in that moment, it felt like everything had faded away, except for them. "Look at what we've built," he said, his voice filled with awe. "We've come so far, but it's not just about the business. It's about us. We've created something beautiful together, something that will last." Emily smiled, her heart full of gratitude. "We've created something much bigger than ourselves. We've created a story that will inspire others, a story of love, perseverance, and the power of second chances." He took her hand, pulling her close. "I couldn't have done it without you. I never thought I'd find someone like you. Someone who challenged me, who made me want to be better. And I never thought I'd find someone who would make me feel like I could have it all," Emily said softly. "Someone who would stand by me, support me, and love me through everything." Their kiss was a promise to continue building their future together, no matter what challenges lie ahead. They had proven that love wasn't just about fairy tales. It was about hard work, compromise, and the willingness to face the world together as a team. As they held each other, Emily couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. They had defied the odds, built a life that they were both proud of, and created a love story that would inspire generations to come. They had shown the world that love was not just about fairy tale endings. It was about the everyday moments, the shared dreams, and the strength to face the future together. And as they looked out at the city they had come to call home, they knew one thing for sure: their story was just beginning. The journey of love and self-discovery between Emily and Alexander has been filled with ups and downs. From their initial clash to their eventual partnership, they've proven that love isn't always smooth sailing. The road to happiness is rarely straightforward, and sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that truly define us. Now, as their story comes to an end, we're left with an important question. What would you do if you were in their shoes? Would you have followed your heart and taken a leap of faith, even when it seemed like everything was against you? Or would you have let your fears and insecurities hold you back, staying in your comfort zone while watching someone else build the life they always dreamed of? In life, there are moments when we must choose between love and ambition, between our past and our future, between what's easy and what's right. Emily and Alexander's story is not just a love story. It's a story of making difficult decisions, of choosing to take risks, and of overcoming obstacles for the chance to build something real and lasting. So here's the question. What would you have done? Would you have risked everything for the chance to follow your heart? Would you have taken that first step even when it seemed impossible? Or would you have played it safe, stuck to what you knew, and let the opportunity slip away? Now let's think about Emily's journey. She had to choose between her pride and her love. She had to confront her insecurities and fears, to admit that she wasn't perfect, and that she needed someone by her side who believed in her. In the end, she chose love. Not just for Alexander, but for herself. She had to realize that her worth wasn't defined by her past or her mistakes, but by her willingness to grow, change, and love without hesitation. And what about Alexander? He had to decide if he would allow his past to dictate his future, or if he would embrace the possibility of love. Would he let his arrogance and pride cloud his judgment, or would he humble himself and open his heart? He chose love, choosing to build something lasting with Emily, and not just seeking power or success. In doing so, he showed us that true strength lies not in dominance, but in vulnerability. Their decisions weren't easy, but they were powerful. They chose each other despite the obstacles, despite the fear, despite everything that told them it couldn't work. And in doing so, they created a love story that inspired a city. But now, it's your turn. Think about your own life and the choices you've had to make. Have you ever faced a moment like Emily and Alexander, where you had to choose between love and ambition, between safety and the unknown? Would you have chosen love if it meant taking risks? Or would you have stayed in your comfort zone, never allowing yourself to experience something that could change your life? There's no right or wrong answer. But the truth is, love doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't ask if you're prepared or if you have it all figured out. Love is messy, unpredictable, and often comes when you least expect it. But that's what makes it beautiful. So, think about it. What would you do? Would you take the risk, step into the unknown, and fight for the love you believe in? Or would you let fear hold you back, choosing comfort over adventure? The world is full of opportunities, and sometimes, the biggest one is love. Emily and Alexander's journey shows us that the best things in life are worth fighting for. And just like them, you have the power to decide how your own story will unfold. Your turn. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. What would you do if you were in their place? Would you follow your heart, no matter the consequences? Or would you play it safe? Let's hear your thoughts. And remember, true love isn't just about finding someone who fits your expectations. It's about choosing each other, even when things are uncertain, even when it feels like the world is against you. True love is about the journey, the struggle, and the victory that comes when you choose to fight for it.